I normally see him, hear him say that when he's teaching, like deliverance or something like that, if there is coming, he's expecting a miracle to happen, he tells his people that, and I'm the congregation, that one person is going to shout an unusual shout, and that means that the angels are going to move. So that's, everyone is screaming at, under the control of the Holy Spirit. But there is one particular voice that stands out, that the prophet or the apostle is looking out for. So when that shout comes, then it means that it's ready to move out. That is the action voice of God. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Does it make sense to you, please? So an unusual shout can cause, turbulence in the whole auditorium, and you realize that other people are also responding to that, screaming here, screaming that. But it wasn't like that before. One particular scream or one particular behavior, it can also come as a person's behavior. The way a person does his things, an unusual behavior makes you know that God is doing something in that person. Or I remember one time also I prayed about, in my family, I prayed and against anything, that was about some years back, against anything that I'm expecting to happen. And then when the next day, when in the morning, I realized that one of my children were behaving very funny. Then I know that prayer that I prayed, it has triggered that. And then I know that is the voice of God. It doesn't necessarily have to come to you. Whatever you are praying for, what you see afterwards, which is unusual, that is the action voice of God. God moves like that. It could be a breakthrough. It could be a healing or a deliverance. That kind of movement that goes on there, that is the action voice of God, because God is an action voice. God, he likes to do things and move things, change things, unusual things that happens. That is the action voice of God. So if you are clear with that, I want to go to the verbal voice of God. So when you talk about the verbal voice of God, it means that God uses your mouth to talk. He talks through you. Whatever you speak, there are two ways. And remember, if I said that there are two, the verbal voice of God, you can get it in the audible voice of God. That is the verbal voice of God, and inaudible voice of God. Those two falls under the verbal voice of God. So know that when we talk about the audible voice of God, this requires that you become very attentive. Just like when you are meditating and you are focusing, and you see, God speaks in an audible voice, so that when you are very quiet and submitting under the leadership of the Holy Spirit, you see that God is speaking. There is the part when it comes out. It comes out in you, out of you, and then you hear it even though you hear from the inside, you might think that you are hearing it from somewhere. That is the audible voice of God. It causes your whole body, to be very attentive. Every part of your being, remember, every part of your being becomes involved. This means that the audible voice of God is louder than your own voice. The voice that, when you talk about the audible voice of God, you might think that it is not as strong, as it's not as loud as before. But as you know, but the moment you are quiet, you realize that you hear something inside you, and then it affects every part of your body. It triggers your body. This thing happened to Jesus. So he heard an audible voice, and it thundered. That kind of thunder, it came, it affects his own, the whole body, though he was able to understand that this is the voice of my Father. But the people around him never felt anything. They could not understand the voice. So it is up to you that when God is talking, you should be able to understand where it's coming from. It is very important. So God uses that, to catch your attention. That burning bush, like in the days of Moses, it was the same thing. Daniel felt the same thing. As Ezekiel experienced it when he heard that kind of thunder. So understand that the audible voice of God is very, very loud, but because sometimes we talk too much, so we think that it's our voices, what we use to talk is louder than the audible voice of God. Actually, if you can't be talking now, but inside you, God is still talking to you. That is how strong your voice is. So if we can silence our voice, which doesn't lead to anything, we talk all the time. But if you can also be quiet and still, we will hear the voice of God very loud and clear. So when you understand this, it demands that you stay very focused. You become aware of your environment.